Greetings, says I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on Vampire the Masquerade. Today I'm going to finish up the basic book, giving you some information about the dependencies. Let's just dive right into it and finish this up. So the first thing you're going to have to look at on the dependencies is a very important thing. It gives you some basic rules on NPCs. This is a group of basic statistics that you can look at that tells you the suggested character builds for a number of types of creatures and then what their attributes and abilities should be to reflect whatever you're trying to build. You can alter these as this. You've got suggestions, you've got suggested equipment. These range from various mortals you might encounter, which could be anything from a police officer to a SWAT officer to anything else. It includes the faithful, which are a non-mystical version of hunters, which may be going after you or other supernatural creatures. If you want to look into supernatural versions of these, there's a book called Hunter that is out that you could look into for, as I said, supernatural versions of these vampire hunters. It also gives information on creating more vampires. These will give information on the various generations of vampires, about what kind of statistics they'll have. They'll be very loose with it and just give you an idea of how powerful each of these should be, reflecting on how much discipline they have, how much other abilities they have, and what it means to be one of them a little bit, so that if you became a threat to them or got into an encounter with one of them, you would know, well, your storyteller would be able to build it out to a proper point for you to actually encounter it. It gives the basic rules of how a ghoul will work. A ghoul is just going to be a reflection of a normal mortal with some disciplined powers, oftentimes the physical ones. So effectively you would use one of the basic mortal stats and then add in its ghoulhood, perhaps giving it extra abilities if it's a very long-winded lived one. It also gives some basic rules for other supernatural creatures. Werewolves, magi, fairies, and ghosts. Werewolves are, of course, exactly what they sound like. They are werewolves. They're Garu. They are shape changers. There are other changing breeds of other types of things, but normally a vampire is going to deal with werewolves as they are the most common. Now, the book gives some information. If you just want to use them very rarely and sparingly, then you could use some of the vampire character statistic blocks in order to build one out, and it would give the basic rules for that. So effectively, if I only need werewolf for one point in time, I could throw it together there. If I'm going to use werewolves a little more often, it is recommended that you use Werewolf the Apocalypse, the book system that is a sister system to this one, which I will talk about at a future point in time, that links intrinsically to this one, and again, it discusses a lot of what's going on in the werewolves and how to build an actual werewolf in that book. Magi, on the other hand, are human wizards. They're the magic users. If you're going to look into using them, you can, of course, use the basic statistics similar to what they did with the werewolf here. It's going to give you some suggestions on how to build one using the vampire system, but they have their own Mage the Ascension, which you can, again, look into just like you looked into the werewolf one in order to build your own mage character if it's very important that mages are intrinsically important to your storyline. Same can be said with fairies. Fairies are creatures from another plane that occasionally enter into our world and visit it. When you want to talk about them, you look into the Changeling books. The Changeling books aren't directly based upon the fairies, but they give information on fairies and their fairy courts and the various things that would exist there. Vampires very rarely gain the abilities to pass into their realms. They're intrinsically an unnatural thing to that area, so it's very hard for them to enter into it. They will occasionally enter into our world. You may, of course, again, meet changelings, which are sort of their lesser kin. The last one, of course, is ghosts. Ghosts do exist. They are the spirits of the dead that have been sort of pushed to haunt through supernatural abilities. If you want to usually use one of them, you might just use them sparingly as what they are. If you want to actually build out statistics, if it's important to, there is Wraith the Oblivion, which gives the basic statistics of a wraith or ghost that you could use then for these adventures. And of course, as I said, you can alter or move around the statistics of these characters or creatures as much as you want to make them your own customs or to build them exactly how you think you would need. This is only coming up with a guide for it or some ideas of how to build some of these. It gives you little suggestions on some of the various ones you might commonly encounter, have to deal with as you are vampires, that even you can easily use them without having to put too much together. Now let's move on. They give some sample information here that could help you with your first game if you are a storyteller or very early players. There is a sample chronicle and a sample story here. So let's talk about the sample chronicle first. The sample chronicle gives you a basic idea of the kind of plot, settings, characters, things of that nature that are going to be important. What is the overall storyline? What is the kind of goals your characters might have as part of this chronicle? It gives an entire listing of NPCs which would be important to it, including all of their statistics, so that you could use these as much or as little as you want. But the basic idea here is that it's setting you up for an entire long-winded storyline, a chronicle, and that you would be able to use this material to the best of your ability ability for building it. The sample story here is, of course, a small adventure that your characters would be going on, dealing with certain characters. It gives various plot points for that, kind of some discussion points between the various characters that they may encounter, and it would be the first one you would run if you're starting in with this chronicle. It would give you an idea of where to start, who you're going to communicate with your group of characters, and where they're going on for the basic plot line. From there, of course, you could evolve it and take the chronicle in any path you have. You've been given the basic building blocks. But this is a great way that if you are very early on as a storyteller, you could use the material in the book here to start out your first effective chronicle and work from there. You could always make up one on your own, but it also, just reading through it might be a great idea as a storyteller to get a hold of how things will work and what you kind of information you're going to need to sort of build it. And from there on, you can build it up with as much information as you want, with as detailed as you want. You may want to detail some characters out. You may not need to detail some NPCs out depending on the types of encounters, and get a hold of what your characters are going to do, because that'll give you an idea of what you're going to need overall. So that's it for today. I talked about what's in the appendices, I talked about some information they give on NPCs and building them, and I talked about your first chronicle and first story that you may take and the examples that they have in this book. So it's the beginnings of the game and beginnings of starting it out now that we've gone through all the rules. This is the big storyteller side I want to say today. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about some stuff from the Player's Guide to Vampire, which introduced a few more concepts which are very important, which we haven't talked about overall. I'm not going to go through everything in that book. There are some more details. I might give you some ideas of what's in that book. But after we're done with that, I'm going to move into specifically talking about the various clans and bloodlines, giving you a good summary of each of those, and some information about them if you want to play them. So if you have any questions, comments, anything to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. Show support for the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.